Welcome to a brand new edition of the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Raymond Wu. As Taiwan becoming more internationally oriented, it'll be interesting to hear how foreign news correspondents report on Taiwan. What are the perspectives they adopt in terms of looking at developments within and around Taiwan? And that is the focus of our program today, as we have the representative from Reuters news agency, Mr. Ralph Jennings, to our program. Ralph, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Raymond.
Yes. Well, first, Ralph, you've been in Taiwan for about 2 years now. Okay. Prior to Taiwan, where were you stationed before? And how do you compare the experiences in the other areas, in the other countries, to your experience of reporting and covering news in Taiwan?
Before I came to Taiwan in 2006,
yes,
I was in Beijing.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Before that, I was
Okay.
in the United States.
Of course.
You cannot compare Taiwan to either place. That's the
Okay.
short, simple answer. The places are completely different.
Of course. And in terms of your work, I understand you work for a different agency, news agency at the time you were in Beijing. Of course, China is a completely different country. In terms of both, how the society is structured, how politics are, conducted there. But as far as people, as far as how you conduct your job, carrying on news stories, making interviews, how does that experience compare with the experiences that you had in Taiwan?
Sure. Over the 7 years that I was in Beijing, I was I was a reporter for about 5 of those years.
Okay.
I found that the stories in Beijing, there is a lot more news in China that's of international interest.
Really?
But the stories are much harder to get than they are in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, the government there restricts our access to many of the hotspots for news, whether it's an accident site
mm-hmm.
or the venue for a political demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
The government often forces the media to leave the site.
Yeah, especially with reference to foreign
That's right.
News media.
And,
yes.
and sometimes they even detain and arrest us.
Yes.
And in extreme cases, they may make us leave the country.
Uh-huh. I hope that never happened to you or your friends.
I was detained. I was never thrown out of the country.
Okay.
On the other hand, many of the common people in China,
Uh-huh.
the people who do not work for the government,
Yes.
are very happy to speak with foreign reporters.
Okay.
They really want their own voices to get out.
Okay.
And they feel honored that you will stop and talk to them because
mm-hmm.
they think they fancy themselves, or they consider themselves very low-class people in some
mm-hmm.
cases.
Mm-hmm.
No culture, no status.
Okay.
And then if the reporter would like to speak to them, they think it's
they're important.
they're important for a moment, and they're very
Yes.
courteous.
Yes.
And often they're very honest about things.
Yes.
And their views may not be the same as the government's views.
Of course. But that offers a very clear contrast to often, in China is the official version that you often hear.
That's right.
But let me ask you, for the 5 years you spent in China, and also for the 2 years in Taiwan, what were the more memorable, coverage that you've done, and what were the experiences like, in terms, for example, you covered the 2008 March presidential election in Taiwan. How is that experience compared with other experiences that you had?
In China, of course, we don't have any elections,
no.
so you can't really compare it.
Okay.
When I first came to Taiwan, I was definitely very touched and very moved by seeing ethnic Chinese people involved in a very vibrant, very active democracy.
Okay.
And I still am. Whenever
Okay.
I see democracy in action, I feel something, and I wonder if China can ever do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some parts of China may be ready for it.
Mm-hmm. We hear about local elections they have in the township, local districts. Is that still, something of tremendous interest for the foreign news media?
Not really. The local elections in China have been active, have been in place now for a number of years. I think the former U.S. President Jimmy Carter was very active in getting those started.
Mm-hmm.
But they haven't really taken off.
Yeah.
Since that they've begun, but they haven't expanded.
Mm-hmm. And also people still, kind of question, whether those local elections are pretty much orchestrated, or are they really a true, viable, vibrant competition between different candidates?
That's right. The kind of the most many of the cynical commentators will say, well, the voters have a choice between Communist Party candidate A and Communist Party candidate B.
Mm-hmm. As you and I first met over the presidential election here earlier this year, and then we also talk about the kinds of impact that this presidential election will have. But overall, in the campaign itself, what were the more striking features that you discovered that, as you said, this is one of the few very vibrant and lively ethnic Chinese democracy in the world? What were the more striking features or experiences that you had in terms of covering that particular election?
When I covered the presidential race here,
yes.
I found myself comparing Taiwan more to the United States than to China. Mm-hmm. And you can see many of the themes in the Taiwan elections reflected also in elections in the United States.
Yes.
You have the insider-outsider. Are you from here? Are you not from here?
Okay.
That dynamic you see often in U.S. elections.
Okay. So
your loyalty to the place that you claim to represent.
Your patriotism. Yes.
Patriotism, accomplishments. What have you really done?
Yes.
What's your track record? What
yes.
have you done in the past as a politician somewhere else? Experience. Also appearance, image. Yes. How good do you look? How good do you sound?
How photogenic
How tall are you? There's a lot of things that make a difference in public perception.
Yeah, so that perception part pretty much is reminiscent of the politics back home. Okay, and also let me ask you, you're being a foreign news correspondent for about 7 years now, 5 in China, then 2 in Taiwan. Among the colleagues that you have, what would be a so-called quote-unquote coveted prize in terms of foreign news correspondent assignment? Would it be to cover a war, like for example the Iraq War of 4 years ago? Would that be something that people look forward to, or is something like a huge opportunity to make a breakthrough career-wise?
The answer to that question depends entirely on who you ask.
Okay. How about for you personally?
For me personally, I can do almost any story that allows me to get close to it. Whatever I cover, I like to see it with myself.
Okay.
And that can be war, that can be a natural disaster. But I prefer to cover things that have some kind of a lasting public policy impact. I like to cover stories that make you think a year later or 5 years later what really happened, and what can we do about it.
Okay.
If it's a war, for example, the war may last only a couple of months and nobody remembers it. So a lot of wars happen and you and I don't know where they were and what happened.
Okay.
But in some wars go on for years and years and involve major countries, such as the Iraq War.
Of course.
And then we continue to talk about that as the years go by.
Yeah.
That kind of story.
For many more years.
That's right. That kind of story is certainly important for any journalist.
Okay, but can you give us an example of all the years you spent as a correspondent? What were the more memorable experiences in terms of you can cover it very close and personal?
Well, one of those is certainly the local election here, the Taiwan elections.
Okay.
Because we had a change of president, a change of party, a change of direction, a change of policy. We went back to one party running.
Both the legislature
and the executive branch, and then we have relations with China, perhaps changing for the better, for the worse. We don't know yet, but they're changing. They're changing very quickly.
Yes.
Another big story that I covered was SARS in China.
Okay.
That was probably the biggest.
In 2003. Yes.
That's right. The biggest single news item there, because I could see it. I was living in Beijing. People around me were affected by it.
Of course.
They had to stay home. They knew people who got sick. They went to the store and they couldn't buy food because the whole store had been emptied by folks afraid of the illness growing. We saw the Chinese government momentarily open up and become very honest with the media. Of course, they became more difficult again after SARS passed.
Of course.
And went back to their old ways of being dishonest and hiding from us, basically.
Yeah, covering up the truth. Yes. Of all the places that you've been to China, within, inside China, what are the more memorable places, the visits that you've had? I suppose that overall, if not for assignment purposes, you're free to travel within China. What are the more memorable places that you've been to, since you've been in China?
That would be really hard to say. The first things that come to mind are Kashgar out in Xinjiang, one of the places in the far, far, far west of China, about as far west as you can go before leaving the country.
Yes.
Because it doesn't look like China, it looks like the Middle East or Central Asia.
Okay.
Another place that I liked a lot was Dalian in the northeast, because the people from the Dongbei, people from the northeast, always talk. They're very open.
Yes.
And you want to know something, even if it's not a nice question, they'll almost always give you an answer.
Response,
they give you a response. That's right.
And they're also generally very loud.
They're loud. They're loud. They're clear, and they're honest, and they're friendly. And then after the interview's over, they invite you out for a drink.
Yeah, that's right. And were there any other experiences that you have people who were just afraid of you, or would just shut up, as soon as you show you IDs and things, and they're not even government people? Were people very apprehensive, that came across as something very odd and things?
Sure, there were those people. Some of them were business people who may have been doing things illegally, operating without a permit in a legal gray area, as they say. Some of them were just ordinary citizens who had no exposure to the media or no exposure to foreigners. Some of them were very well-trained Communist Party members, and they knew they weren't supposed to talk to us.
Yes.
And some you never know. They just say no, thank you, and that's it, and you never know why.
Okay, but let me ask you, in terms of the use of English as a communication tool, did you find that more difficult in China or more difficult in Taiwan?
I don't really know. I do most of my interviews in Chinese.
Oh, okay.
Most of the reporters who are stationed for the long term in Taiwan or in China, they speak Chinese.
Yes.
And they seldom use English to do their interviews, unless the other person, the interviewee, wants to speak English, and they're very, very much able to do so.
Okay. Yeah. So that hasn't really been a problem in terms of your work.
No, it hasn't.
Good to know. The reason I ask, Ralph, is when we come back after this short break, we're going to ask Mr. Ralph Jennings about his experiences in Taiwan, whether Taiwan is more English-friendly, or whether Taiwan is more internationally in tune with what's happening with the rest of the world. We'll be right back.